There is a man lying face down on a cold stone floor. It is the middle of the night, and he has not eaten in 7 days. His servants stand in the doorway, whispering, "They have brought him bread. They have brought him wine. They have set it on the floor beside him, and they have watched it go untouched, hour after hour, until the bread has gone hard and the flies have found the cup." This man is a king. He has armies. He has palaces. He could have anything in the world carried to him on a silver plate. And he is lying in the dark, refusing all of it, because a few rooms away, a baby is dying. His baby. His name is David. And you probably know him as the boy who killed a giant, or the shepherd who wrote the Psalms your grandmother underlined in her Bible. But right now, he is none of those things. Right now, he is just a father with an empty stomach and a breaking heart. And he is doing the one thing he can think to do when there is nothing left to do. He is fasting. Here is what most people believe about that moment. They believe David is making a trade. 7 days of hunger in exchange for one healed child. They believe he is trying to get God's attention, that if he just goes without long enough, prays hard enough, suffers loud enough, heaven will have to lean down and give him what he wants. And they believe that because it is exactly what we would do. It is exactly what we still do. But that is not what is happening on that floor. And when you understand what is really happening, not just to David, but to Esther, to Daniel, to a whole pagan city, to Jesus in the wilderness, it changes everything you thought you knew about why anyone would ever choose to be hungry on purpose. Because this is not a story about skipping meals. This is not a story about willpower. This is not a story about earning God's attention through suffering. This is a story about what fasting actually does, and it does not do what you think. And there is one man in this video who got his answer before he even finished praying. A war was fought in the heavens over his empty stomach, and he never knew it. We will get to him. But not yet. First, you need to meet the Father on the floor, and you need to hear what he says when the baby finally dies. The baby dies on the 7th day, and the servants are terrified to tell him. Think about that. This man has starved himself for a week while the child clung to life. What is he going to do now that the child is gone? They are afraid he will fall apart. They are afraid he might hurt himself. So they stand there murmuring until David notices them whispering and understands what the whispering means. And then he does something that makes no sense to anyone in that room. He gets up off the floor, he washes his face, he changes his clothes, he goes into the house of God and worships. And then, and this is the part that stuns his servants, he asks for food. He sits down and he eats. His servants cannot take it. So they ask him straight, "While the child was alive, you fasted and wept. Now that he is dead, you get up and eat?" It is backwards. It is the opposite of how grief is supposed to work. And David gives them an answer that unlocks this entire subject. While the child was alive, he says, "I fasted and wept, for I thought, who can tell whether God will be gracious to me? But now he is dead. Can I bring him back again? I shall go to him, but he shall not return to me." Do you hear what he just admitted? David never believed his hunger could force God's hand. He was not paying a ransom in missed meals. He said it himself. Who can tell? He did not know what God would do. He fasted because while there was still something to seek, he wanted every part of himself bent toward the seeking. And the moment there was nothing left to seek, he stopped. Just like that. The Hebrew phrase underneath David's fast shows up all over the Old Testament. It is ana nephesh, and it does not mean starve the body. It means afflict the soul, to humble the self. Fasting in the Bible was never primarily about the stomach. The stomach was just the doorway. The real work happened one level down, in the place where a man decides he is not in charge. David proved it by getting up and eating. His fast was never a transaction. It was a posture. And when the posture had done its work, he laid it down. Now hold that thought, because I want you to meet a woman who fasted for the exact opposite reason David did. Not over a death that had already happened, but over a death she was about to walk straight into. Her name is Esther, and she is a queen, a young Jewish woman who has ended up, through a chain of events nobody could have designed, married to the most powerful man on earth, the king of Persia, and she has just learned that a decree has gone out to slaughter every Jew in the empire, her people, her family, herself. There is exactly one person who might stop it. Her. All she has to do is walk into the king's throne room and beg for their lives. There is only one problem. In Persia, you do not walk into the king's presence uninvited. If you do, and he does not raise his golden scepter to receive you, you are executed on the spot, and the king has not called for Esther in 30 days. So she sends word to her people. And listen to what she asks for, not weapons, not a plan, not an army. She says, "Gather every Jew in the city, do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast the same way. And then I will go to the king, though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. If I perish, I perish." That is not the sentence of someone trying to bribe God into a good outcome. That is the sentence of someone who has already surrendered the outcome entirely. Esther does not fast to guarantee she survives. She fasts to empty herself of the desperate need to survive, so that when she walks into that room, she is not begging for her own life. She is spending it. Here's what most people miss about these two stories sitting side by side. David fasted looking backward, at a death he could not prevent. Esther fasted looking forward, at a death she was choosing to risk. Completely different situations. And yet the fast does the exact same thing in both of them. It strips away the illusion that they are in control. It empties their hands, and it turns out you do not even have to know the God of Israel for that emptying to work. Because there is a fast in the Bible thrown by an entire city full of people who worship the wrong gods, in a place so violent and so cruel that its name was a curse. The city is Nineveh, and a reluctant prophet named Jonah has just walked through its streets, announcing that in 40 days it will be destroyed. And the city believes him, from the greatest of them to the least. And the king of Nineveh, a pagan ruler on a pagan throne, rises up, takes off his royal robe, covers himself in sackcloth, and sits down in the ashes. He orders a fast so total that it includes the animals. The Hebrew word for what they did is tsum, a word tied to the shutting of the mouth. An entire city went silent and hungry at the same time. And God, the text says, saw their works, and he relented. He did not destroy them. They did not earn that. You cannot earn your way out of judgment in 3 days of hunger. But they did do something. They stopped. They shut their mouths. They emptied themselves of the noise and the appetite and the pride all at once. And in that emptiness, something got through that had never gotten through before. 3 fasts, a grieving father, a terrified queen, a doomed city, and not one of them is buying anything from God. But it gets stranger, because so far, every fast has been a response to a crisis. What happens when someone fasts with no emergency at all? What happens when the fast is the weapon and not the cry for help? Before we go any further, let me say something to you directly. If you have made it this far, you are not a casual viewer. You're someone who actually wants to understand this, not the Sunday school version, but what the Bible really shows about fasting. So if this is helping, do me one favor, subscribe. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are hungry for the same thing you are. And while you are down there, I want you to answer a question in the comments, and I will come back to it at the end. Have you ever fasted and felt absolutely nothing? Be honest. I'm going to explain why that happens before this video is over. Now, back to the pattern we have been building. 3 people, 3 fasts, and a truth starting to take shape underneath all of them. Every single one of them emptied something: grief, fear, pride, appetite. And in that emptiness, God was not summoned. God was simply heard. But everyone we have met so far was fasting in the middle of a disaster. What we have not seen yet is what fasting does when there is no fire to put out, when the fast is not the last resort, but the sharpest tool in the room. That is where we go next. And the first person waiting there spent 40 days in a desert, hungry, alone, and hunted. The wilderness of Judea is not a metaphor. It is a real place, and it is brutal. Bare limestone hills the color of bone. No shade, no water. The kind of heat that presses down on you like a hand. And somewhere out in that emptiness, a man has been alone for 40 days without food. He is not there because of a crisis. Nobody is dying. No city is under judgment. He walked into that desert on purpose, led there, the Bible says, by the Spirit of God himself. And at the end of 40 days, the text gives us 4 of the most human words in all of Scripture. He afterward hungered. Of course he did. Because this man is not only the Son of God, he is fully a man with a stomach that cramps and knees that buckle. And after 40 days, that body is screaming. And it is exactly then, at the weakest, hungriest, most depleted moment, that the tempter shows up. And watch what the tempter goes after first. Food. Turn these stones into bread. You're starving. You have the power. Use it. Feed yourself. You would expect a hungry man to be an easy target, but that is the whole point of the 40 days. Jesus had spent them emptying himself of every appetite that could be used against him, and when the test came, he answered from that emptiness. Man shall not live by bread alone, he said, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. The Greek word for what he was doing out there is nestaia, simple abstinence from food. But look at what that abstinence had built in him. It had not made him weak in the moment that mattered. It had made him unbreakable. This is the part nobody tells you about fasting. It is not only a cry for help in a disaster, it can be a weapon. It sharpens the spirit precisely by starving the flesh. Jesus did not fast to convince the Father of anything. The Father had already spoken over him at the Jordan. "This is my beloved Son." He fasted to be ready. And when the enemy came for him at his hungriest, he was. Now, let me take you from a desert to a temple, from a man in his 30s to a woman in her 80s. Her name is Anna, and most people have never heard of her because she gets 3 verses and then vanishes from the Bible entirely. But those 3 verses are staggering. Anna is a widow. She lost her husband after only 7 years of marriage, and she never remarried. Instead, Luke tells us she stayed in the temple and served God with fastings and prayers, night and day, for decades. By the time we meet her, she's 84 years old. Do the math on that. This is a woman who has fasted her way through most of a century. And here's what her fasting bought her. Nothing. No blessing, no miracle, no reward you could hold in your hand. What it bought her was a face. Because on one ordinary day, a poor couple from Nazareth walks into the temple to present their newborn. And this ancient woman, who has spent her whole long life hungry and watching, takes one look at that baby. And she knows. She knows who he is. She had emptied herself for so many years that when the Messiah of the world showed up as a 40-day-old infant in a peasant girl's arms, she was one of the only people on earth awake enough to recognize him. Everyone else in that crowded temple saw a baby. Anna saw God. That is what a lifetime of fasting does. It does not stockpile blessings. It keeps you awake. And the earliest Christians understood this in a way we have almost completely lost. There's a document called the Didache, written so early that some of the apostles may still have been alive when it was circulating. And it tells the first believers to fast twice a week, but to deliberately choose different days than the religious leaders of their time, so their fasting would never become a performance to be seen. A church father named Tertullian, writing around the year 200, put it even more bluntly. He said fasting presses the body low so the spirit can rise, not to impress God, to make room for him. Because here's the thing, the prophets had been screaming for centuries, and almost nobody heard it. God does not actually want your hunger. Listen to what he says through Isaiah. He looks at people fasting for show, going through the motions, heads bowed like reeds, and he rejects the whole thing. And then he tells them what he actually wants. Is not this the fast that I have chosen? To loose the bands of wickedness, to let the oppressed go free, to feed the hungry, to bring the poor into your house? Do you see it? God is not moved by an empty stomach. He is moved by a broken open heart that finally starts loving the way he loves. The prophet Joel said the same thing in one unforgettable line. "Rend your heart," he wrote, "and not your garments. Do not tear your clothes to look sorry. Tear open the thing inside you that has been closed." This is not a story about food. This was never a story about food. It is a story about what happens to a human being who stops feeding the loudest parts of themselves long enough to hear the quietest voice in the universe. And no one in the entire Bible shows you that more clearly than a man who fasted for 3 weeks by a river and got an answer he never even knew had already left heaven. His name is Daniel, and by the time this final story happens, he is an old man. He has survived an entire lifetime in exile. He was taken from his homeland as a teenager, dragged into the palace of Babylon, and he has outlasted kings and empires. You may know him as the man in the lion's den. But this, what happens by the river, almost nobody talks about. and it is the most important fasting scene in the entire Bible. Daniel is in mourning. Something has troubled him so deeply that, he tells us, he ate no pleasant bread, no meat, no wine touched his lips for 3 full weeks. 21 days. He is by the banks of the great river, the Tigris, an old man emptied out with grief and prayer, waiting for an answer from a God who has gone silent. And on the 21st day, the answer comes. But it does not come quietly. The Bible describes a being like a man clothed in linen, his body like beryl, his face like lightning, his eyes like flaming torches, his voice like the sound of a multitude. The men with Daniel do not even see it, but they feel it, and they flee in terror. Daniel is left alone, and the strength drains out of him, and he falls with his face to the ground. And then this messenger from heaven speaks, and what he says should stop you cold. He says, "Daniel, do not be afraid, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your words were heard." From the first day. Do you understand what that means? Daniel fasted for 21 days, and the messenger is telling him that his prayer was heard, and the answer was dispatched on day 1, not day 21. Day 1. The answer had been traveling toward him for 3 weeks. So where was it? And here the veil pulls back on something staggering. The messenger explains the delay. He says, "The prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. There was a war. An unseen conflict in the heavenly places, one messenger held up in battle for exactly as long as Daniel had been fasting on the ground. Daniel could not see it. He felt only silence. He must have wondered, somewhere in those 3 weeks, whether anyone was listening at all. Someone had been listening since the first day. And a war had been fought over his empty stomach that he never knew about until it was already won. This is the man I told you about at the very beginning, the one who got his answer before he finished praying. Daniel never knew his fast had launched something in the heavens on the very first night. He just kept showing up, hungry, faithful, in the dark, not knowing that heaven had already answered and was fighting to reach him. And that changes everything about what his fast was doing. Daniel's 3 weeks did not make God answer. God had answered on day 1. So what were the 3 weeks for? Let me put it to you like this. Imagine it is 3 in the morning and you are a parent and you are standing in a dark hallway outside a nursery. Your newborn is in there and you are frozen, holding your own breath, straining to hear one thing, the sound of that baby breathing. And what is the first thing you do? You turn off the fan, you silence your phone, you stop moving, you make the whole house go quiet. Now, did turning off the fan create the breathing? Of course not. The baby was breathing the entire time. The breath was always there. You did not silence the house to make the sound happen. You silenced it so you could finally hear the sound that was already there, underneath all the noise. That is fasting. That is exactly what every person in this video was doing. David, on the floor, Esther, in the palace, the king in the ashes, Jesus in the desert, Anna in the temple, and Daniel by the river. Not one of them turned on God's voice by going hungry. They turned off everything else. They shut the mouth and the appetite and the noise and the frantic human need to be in control. And in that sudden, terrible silence, they could finally hear what had been there the whole time. Daniel's answer was never late. It was traveling the entire 21 days. The fasting did not speed it up. The fasting kept Daniel still enough and quiet enough and emptied enough to be standing there listening when it finally arrived. So let me give you 3 things to carry out of this video. The first is simply true, and it will take pressure off you for the rest of your life. Fasting does not earn God's response. Every single story we walk through proves it. David admitted he never knew if God would answer. Esther said, "If I perish, I perish." Daniel's answer had already left heaven on the first day. You are not buying anything with your hunger. The God you are reaching for is not standing behind a counter waiting for your payment. He was already moving before you skipped a single meal. The second one is for you, personally. Fasting does not move God closer to you. It removes what is standing between you and a God who is never far away. The appetite, the noise, the illusion that you are the one in control. Fasting is not a hunger strike to get heaven's attention. It is the turning off of every fan in the house so you can finally hear the breathing that was there all along. And the third one is the one I actually want you to feel. Near the beginning, I asked you to leave a comment if you have ever fasted and felt absolutely nothing. And I promised I would tell you why that happens. Here's why. It usually happens because we go into a fast trying to get something, an answer, a breakthrough, a sign, and we spend the whole time straining to make God speak, when the entire point was to go quiet enough to hear that He already had. The empty stomach was never the point. The empty hands were. Hands that have finally stopped grabbing, stopped negotiating, stopped clutching for control. Hands that are finally open enough to receive. The stomach growls so the hands can open. That is the whole thing. That is what fasting is for. So let me ask you again, now that you have seen all of it, have you ever fasted and felt nothing? Or have you ever fasted and heard God more clearly than you ever had in your life? Tell me below. I read them, and I promise you, someone scrolling through those comments at 3 in the morning needs to hear exactly what you are about to write. Because here's the truth this whole video has been walking toward. You were never trying to get God's attention. You already had it. From the first day. You always did. Fasting was never how you got His. It was how you got yours back.